And we now have another terrific panel coming up, which also talks about managing transparency and risk. This in your social responsibility and sustainability communications. Delighted to have, we don't always have panels moderated by lawyers, but in this case, we think it kind of makes some sense. So Carmen Liu from Wachtell Lipton, a CSP company, really one of the leaders in this space, will be our moderator. And then welcome Tyler from PayPal. Sandy, we get to hear her again, so let's give her a big round of applause. And our own Jackie Albano from Tapestry and former CCPer. So thank you. Guys, welcome up.
All right, I'm going to get started, everyone. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for the wonderful introduction. I am indeed a lawyer, but trust me, this hopefully doesn't get us into difficult conversations here. I think this is all about all the contributions that companies can do in terms of communicating their social responsibility to their different stakeholders. And I'm so excited to have with me today, as Daryl mentioned, starting with here is Tyler Spalding, who is a Senior Director of Corporate Affairs and Global Head of Social Innovation at PayPal. Next to Tyler, I have Jackie, who is a Director of ESG Communications at Tapestry. And then also I have Sandy Nessing, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of American Electric Power. So I think today we really have kind of two key objectives. The first is to kind of understand what is the role of transparency in terms of communications with respect to corporate social responsibility. What are some of the risks involved with delivering that transparency? And I think we're also going to then discuss some of the strategies that different companies can deploy in terms of communicating to their different stakeholders. And I think this is such a relevant conversation today because the stakes never have been higher. I think so many different stakeholders at companies expect businesses, turn to businesses, trust businesses to really communicate and convey their values. And then when things don't go quite right, I think the consequences, as we have seen in the last 12 months, I think the stakes are just so high. So I really kind of just want to start our conversation today with posing a question to all of our panelists here, which is, what does transparency mean to you, and why is it important in the work that you do at your company? I might start with Tyler.
Yeah, so hi everyone, good morning. Pleasure to be here, and thank you to the CECP team and to Carmel for moderating this conversation. I think, I think about this in terms of two sort of ways. One is the breadth of all of the stakeholders that we serve as a company. Oftentimes we think, especially now, think about the investor, think about this work through the investor lens, particularly at a public company. But I think also, for us, we think about this work very much from an employees first perspective. We also increasingly think about this work through the regulator lens. And I think first and foremost, really understanding the full breadth of stakeholders that we are trying to serve, what issues are most significant or material to them, and being really grounded in what do our stakeholders need to hear from us, and what action and progress do they expect from us over time. And then really engaging in and committing to a long-term conversation. I think about this work as a journey as opposed to, a destination. 2 weeks ago, we, as many of you probably have been doing, we're in reporting season. We published our global impact report 2 weeks ago, and I really think about that as, a touchstone for ongoing dialogue and engagement with all of those stakeholders that I mentioned before. It's not a sort of like, here it is, hope it works for you, and talk to you next year. It really is an opportunity to ground conversations in an ongoing way and understand, where do you really expect us to go from here? So I think about this from a broad multi-stakeholder view, and then also as a journey as opposed to a destination.
I think I just want to reiterate, I think you touched on two really important points, which is first, you have to see it through a multi-stakeholder lens, that any of your communications can't just be delivered to one particular audience. You first need to assess the different audiences. And I also really, I think, liked your point, Tyler, and so important about this as being an evolving process. It's an iterative process. That there's no one static approach to any of this. I wanted to turn to you, Jackie, about it's really, really tricky time. When we were preparing for this panel, you talked about just trying to, in the last couple of months, navigating the political backdrop, the demand from your different stakeholders, internal and external. What are some of the strategies that you have deployed and seen being effective in terms of communicating that transparency?
I want to first echo everything that Tyler said. We are aligned on that. I also want to point out that I don't think anybody up here has ever been in movies or television shows. And I think we need to talk to Sarah and maybe Allison and Carrie and Daryl about why we had to follow Leo Schreiber. I know. We appreciate everyone's expectations, but thanks for that.
But we're managing them.
Yeah, we're managing them. We're very transparent about it too. It is a really hard time, and I think that one of the most important things is being prepared. The most important thing for Tapestry is having communications, being prepared to communicate. Education is another really key part. So who are we educating? Who are our stakeholders? Also our employees, as Tyler mentioned before, and as Liev mentioned before, the employees are really important. So how can we educate our employers or our employees on what we are doing in the ESG space? One of the really critical parts is also scenario planning. As Carmel, as you mentioned, it's a really hard time, and anything could pop off at any second, and it generally does. So something that we do at Tapestry, we actually have a group called CMAC, which stands for Cultural Moments Action Committee. And that is dedicated to being able to respond rapidly when things happen. It has representatives from communications, from legal, from sustainability, from risk and reputation. And really the goal is to be able to respond to issues when they happen and to respond authentically and to make sure that they align with our values and how we operate as a company. And then I think the other, really the most important part of being able to respond is being true to your values. You have to evaluate every issue and everything that comes up. Are you credible? Are you capable? We use that framework in Tapestry as part of our CMAC, and we consider every issue that we address to be, are we credible in the space? Can we actually, can we speak to it? Do we have experience with it? And are we capable of responding to it? So I think those are probably some of the more important things that we consider during this time.
That's so incredibly well put. I know, Sandy, you also have a framework very much like Jackie at American Electric Power to think about all these different issues. I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on strategy.
Yeah, so building on what Jackie and Tyler have already said, you do have to be mindful of all your different stakeholders. So we have very robust disclosure at AEP, and it's constantly evolving. It is definitely a journey. We look at our materiality assessments. What are our material issues? We also pay a lot of attention to what are the questions that stakeholders are asking us. In fact, when we sit down to do an outline of our sustainability report, we actually go back and look at all our notes from those conversations. What were the questions that came up the most frequently? Were there any aha moments? Were there new issues that should be on our radar or will be on our radar that we need to start paying attention to? And then we have a framework in place, as you mentioned, Carmel, that when we do get these requests, how do we decide, yes, we're going to disclose? So there are a couple different ways that we do that. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One is a couple of years ago, we had the threat of a shareholder proposal because the shareholder really wanted more robust disclosure around DEI. And what they told us was that we can see that your recruitment looks really good, but what we can't see is, are those people advancing? Are they staying? What's the turnover rate? Is it really successful, or are you just putting it out there as this is a good number on the front end? And no one else had really kind of put all that whole spectrum of metrics out there. And utilities are very, very conservative, and no one wanted to be first. But we pulled together a group of legal and HR, sustainability, and really had a very reflective conversation about, well, what's wrong with putting this out there? This really speaks to not only where we are, but the challenges. And also the progress that we're making. So long story short, we did end up publishing those additional metrics, and it was great. I consider that a real win. I'm always pushing the envelope anyways. What can we do more? Not without, always within reason, but I felt that was really important. So another example, and I want to get to the risk part because I do think that that's a real issue. I work for an electric utility that is based in 11 states that are primarily deep red. You don't say climate change, you don't say ESG, you don't say clean, you don't say transition. So what do you say? so what can you say? So I write the climate section of our report every year because I do most of our climate work. And our regulatory folks wanted to scrub all that language out of that section. And I was like, well, then what are we talking about? We're not talking about energy transition. What are we talking about then? But they were reacting to negative regulatory decisions that we had received in at least 2 states, Texas and West Virginia. I will call them out because Texas, for example, denied solar for us 3 times, so we're never going back there with solar. West Virginia disallowed fuel cost recovery, which is unprecedented, to the tune of over $200 million. So huge risk. And what they were very concerned about was if we go in there and talk about this energy transition, as we would talk about it with our investors, we're going to continue to get these bad regulatory decisions because the chair of one of the public service commissions told us that that's what would happen. So we had to work really closely. I worked with the regulatory team, with the legal team, and with the CEO, because he told me, I want to go into the chair of that commissioner's office and say, look, the tone has changed. We're not tone deaf. We understand what your concerns are, but we're also not walking away from our goals because we got to go to the capital markets and get money, and we can't do that if we walk away from our goals. And so that was a really good conversation and really helped us to frame that section of the report. But that was probably the toughest one that I've ever written in 18 years. So.
Well, and if you don't mind, I mean, I do think one of the themes in both of your stories, Sandy, is like this is a full team sport at our companies. Like it is not one individual's or one function's responsibility. If we're going to live our values in all of what we do and all of the ways that we show up with our stakeholders, the company has to be aligned. And we have to do that scenario planning to say, okay, how are we going to step up and express our values and defend our values when we need to? And how are we going to ensure that we as a company are all aligned and pulling on all of those levers that we can to do so in an effective way? And so, I'm sure we've got, a couple hundred people in this room. We've got a couple hundred ways in which our organizations are structured. But it sort of doesn't really matter because you still, at the end of the day, you still need, finance and legal and compliance and comms and the CEO all rowing in the same direction with your values sort of as the North Star.
I think could not be more well put, Tyler. Thank you for raising this. I think it's so important to understand that each of your different stakeholders create both risks and opportunities. And because of this, you really need to kind of have a very good view of what the different roles and kind of influences they each have in terms of defining your business strategy, but also having everyone on board, as you said, Tyler, making this a full team sport where everyone is speaking with a united voice, knowing that you're rowing in the one direction. So I kind of wanted to just touch on a bit more about, we talk a lot about stakeholders. We know that we're in a very fragmented, polarized environment, regulators pulling on one end, investors pulling on another. When you are making these very hard decisions, and when you're thinking about how do I manage risk, how do I maximize opportunity, how do you think through the different groups? What are the groups that you think are going to be most powerful in certain situations, and how do you kind of manage the risk?
For me, it's pretty straightforward. It's the regulators and it's the investors. They are on complete opposite sides of the spectrum. And so I have to manage both of those. From an investor perspective, you know, I think about, well, what are the consequences if we don't disclose this, or if we don't engage here? So it's not just about the disclosure, it's really about the engagement. I think that's your most effective way to disclosure, right? Because you can actually tell your story and frame your message, you know, one-on-one with these investors. But I do think that from an investor perspective, we're thinking, okay, will this lead to shareholder activism? Will this lead to divestiture? We have had threats of divestiture before, so we're very mindful of that. We have a lot of European investors, and they are very much more forward and progressive than US investors in the sense of ESG and sustainability and how much they value that. But then you've got the regulators on the other end who don't want to hear anything about it. And so, you know, how do you work? It's a big team sport is really what it is, as Tyler said. There's no other way around it. You've got to bring all the subject matter experts to the table to figure out, you know, what are those risks and consequences, and is it an acceptable risk to take? Are we just going to let them file that shareholder proposal and just take our lumps because we believe that this is the right position for us, or are we going to negotiate? You know, I'm pretty proud of the fact that one of my objectives every year is 0 shareholder proposals that go to the proxy statement, and I've achieved that for 9 consecutive years. My peers cannot say that. My peers cannot say that. And I really attribute that to the engagement, the level of engagement and the level of disclosure and the willingness to do that. You know, we took an open door policy many years ago and said, you know what, anybody who wants to talk to us, door's open, we're going to talk. And we bring the subject matter experts. Sometimes we bring the C-suite to the table, depending on what the issues are and who the stakeholders are. And it's made such a huge difference. But it is a collaborative effort across the enterprise.
We're very different industries. Fashion is consumer discretionary. We are not utilities. But where we are similar is that we are all rowing in the same direction. It's a team effort. It's a team sport. In CMAP, we have everybody represented. I personally work with social impact. I have a colleague from the social impact here today. I work with legal. I work with sustainability, EI&D. I work with everyone on this. So we're quite similar there. But where we differ is that for Tapestry, we have stakeholders that really range everywhere from investors to consumers. And consumers we don't know what's coming next. And our consumers can be very vocal, and we all know now that consumers want to buy and purchase goods from companies that share their values. So we need to always be paying attention to the market. We need to be listening to our consumers. What is it that they want to hear from us? We need to be engaging with our communities. We need to invest in our communities. Our social impact team is regularly talking to our nonprofit partners to hear what the situation is. How are we doing? Do we need to do better? What are the current issues? We're constantly adjusting. I always like to say that as a communications person, particularly for someone working in ESG, which is always changing, I rarely ever put a document in final, right? Everything is a draft. And it only is a final, and it gets turned into a PDF when it's a press release and it's going up on our website. Everything else that I do is constantly changing, and we always have to be prepared to pivot, to adjust, to tweak, because we're listening and we're engaging. And that's okay. That's part of the job.
I'll just add another little layer of complexity here. Totally agree those stakeholder groups are really important to us, but I think we proudly say, and have for many years, that we're an employee-first company. And so for us, that rings true in how we build and guide and organize this work day in, day out. And I think similarly, employees, particularly in the tech or finance spaces where we sort of have a foot in both at PayPal, they're very competitive talent pools. And we find often that we hear about either areas of interest or issues or questions, first from our employees. So from sort of a issues management perspective, it's very helpful to be very connected with all of our employee communities, and be listening constantly and creating those channels and the psychological safety to be able to have those tough conversations day in, day out. But also on the opportunity side, we also see just incredible opportunity when we are motivating our employees around our values, around our mission, and deploying against that in a consistent way across the world and across all of the different functions and teams that make up a diverse company like PayPal. They really, really, we achieve amazing social impact and environmental progress, but we also, see and we have mapped this, with a lot of specificity with our HR team, that engagement actually drives greater business outcomes. And so for us, we take an employees first approach in everything that we do, and that extends to the way that we communicate and engage with our stakeholders too.
Thank you, Ty. I think you raise a really interesting and important point, which is the growing influence and importance of engaging with employees and the consequences of when you don't get it right and how public and ugly these fights could be. And we've seen this, in the proxy contests being waged this year. But with employees, the communication channels are not always the same as when you say, for example, talk to your investors, talk to the public consumer. What are some of the tools and strategies that you use to kind of manage employees? Because they're often the first to hear and the first to make demands, but you may want to take a different path in terms of how to engage with them. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think it really starts with constant listening and a commitment to constant engagement. And it can't be something that you say you're going to do. Like, you have to also live that commitment day in, day out. So if you're not in a position to do that, then perhaps you shouldn't be an employee first, sort of take an employee's first approach. But I think, we have a lot of different tools in our toolbox when we think about that engagement. And I think, every situation is a little bit different, and you learn with every scenario, and you become a lot more precise over time in understanding, okay, which issues are really, getting a lot of momentum and we've got to dive in, or which are more sort of fringe views. So as you listen and as you build that capability over time, you become a lot smarter. But I think, we've done everything from, big CEO statements and company statements, and that are, backed up by, huge actions. So in 2020, following the murder of George Floyd, we put into place a $500 million commitment, and our CEO was on the front lines of engaging with our ERGs and internal and external stakeholders, but really our employees. But in other situations, you sort of have to take a different tact and perhaps set up more safe space conversations that are guided and led by perhaps internal experts, but also perhaps some also external people that we bring in. And I think it all emanates, though, from the constant listening and engagement, and really being able to understand with precision and measure, the velocity of a topic at a given time.
Jackie, I thought you saw you nodding your head earlier.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We have We have very strong employee engagement at our company. We have several EBRGs that are active. We also have 3 different brands. So Tapestry is the parent company of Coach, Kate Spade, and Stuart Weitzman. And each brand attracts a different kind of employee. And each brand stands for different issues. And we will get a different response depending on the issue from a group of employees. So we have, as Tyler mentioned, we have several different tools that we will deploy depending on what's happening. We have essentially, there's a toolbox that we all have, we've all built up from internal activities to external ones. And sometimes we need to do things, we need to do things internally that we may not express externally. So for example, the big question of do you say something or do you stay silent on certain topics? We may be chattering and offering a lot of opportunities for employees to engage on a topic and for us to really listen to them. We may not say anything externally. It may not align with our credible and capable framework. We really need to be able to show up. We feel very strongly that you can't stand for everything because then you stand for nothing. And we have to be credible when we say something externally, and we have to be capable of following through on it. That doesn't mean, of course, that we don't offer opportunities for employees internally to talk, to discuss, to share feelings. But it's a balancing act, and you really have to decide per issue, per topic, how you're going to respond.
I'll build on this. I'm not going to repeat it because you guys said it all, but I'm going to give you an example of employee engagement that's really critical to change management. There's an issue around environmental justice that is very prevalent across the country right now, particularly driven from the top down from the federal government. And it's tied to all the grant programs, the IRA, the IIJA, all of those things. But some of the states have also picked up that mantle and run with it. So a couple of our states were among the first to really start to hone in on environmental justice, Virginia and Michigan. And they started asking our operating company presidents and our folks who were testifying in rate cases, so what's your EJ policy? How do you consider EJ when you're citing that transmission line or developing that resource plan or those kinds of things? So it led us to develop a policy. Well, a policy is great, but it's on a piece of paper, and how do you really bring that to life for people? And it's really through employee engagement. It was a totally new concept, even though it wasn't totally new. We had been engaging. We had been doing the things in the communities that we needed to be doing. But we hadn't really framed it that way. So we had the policy. It took us a year because we wanted to make sure that we got it right. The language was right. We weren't condescending. We weren't talking to ourselves. So we tested it externally and internally. And now we're in the process of operationalizing it. My energy transition manager has been doing 40 to 50 road shows with every group possible across the enterprise. What is it? Because they have to understand the what before they can understand the why and the how, right? So first of all, it's like understand what environmental justice is. So she's done the road show. We're in our 3rd year of this work now. Developed a framework. How do we operationalize that? If I'm a planner planning a transmission line, how do I embed that in that process? What are the considerations? What are the things that we need to do? So fast forward a couple of years, and now people are coming to us and saying, oh my God, here's what I'm thinking, and can you show me how to use that EJ tool that EPA has out there so I can better understand the demographics and the communities that we're proposing to put a line through, or whatever it is. And what they're learning is they're learning new things about their own service territory and their own customers, which is fascinating to see. So, and it's through that employee engagement process, and it's, there's lots of different ways that we do it, but those road shows made a huge difference, and she continues to do those today. We have an advisory group. We formed a test group to do a pilot of the framework. And then there's training, the whole 9 yards. But we've engaged employees every step of the way. And that's why it will be successful, because of that level of engagement.
Thank you, Sandy. I think since we're getting to time, I think I kind of want to capture all the incredible, valuable advice you've given to the audience. I think, as given the amount of time we talked about employees, I think that one key takeaway is it is important to engage with employees, and they're really a different stakeholder. You really have to keep your ear on the ground. You have to figure out the different needs of your different employee base, and then you also have to make those judgment calls, like what are the things you need to respond to, and what are the things that you need to kind of take a more of a wait-and-see approach. I also thought, Tyler, your advice about rowing in one direction, making sure that all the different parts of the organization are aligned is just so important, especially today, I think, where all the efforts we do in social responsibility have to be almost justified because, as in terms of corporate strategy, is it delivering actual value, just given all the pressures that are facing companies on these issues? And I think, Jackie, and Sandy, I think, having a framework, being prepared ahead of time, really knowing what matters and having a thought process, I think that's also really, really important. So thank you for sharing with us all your incredible, valuable advice and experiences today. I think it's just so invaluable.
Thank you.
Thank you.